when you're in a world where 2 out of 3 adults are unmarried, you're having to find pretty good reasons to get married and stay married. There's cohabitation, there's divorce, whatever it is. These are exceptionally hardy marriages in that kind of a world. And it shows up in the marital premium.
Married people are happier than the unmarried, on average. Those who are married and having regular sex are even happier. And over time, the difference between the happiness of the married and the unmarried is growing. So what do the statistics tell us about marriage, sex, and happiness? Welcome to the Chicago Booth Review podcast, where we bring you groundbreaking academic research in a clear and straightforward way. I'm Hal Weitzman, and today I'm talking with Chicago Booth's Sam Peltzman about his research into happiness and marriage. Is there a big difference between being married and just cohabiting? And does having sex more frequently mean you're more likely to be happier? Sam Peltzman, welcome back to the Chicago Booth Review podcast.
It's my pleasure.
We have talked before on this podcast about happiness. So remind us, how do you know when people are happy or not? What's your methodology?
I don't have a methodology, nor do I pretend to be an expert on the topic of happiness. I'm just curious about how the numbers that we have are distributed in the population, and the numbers we have are the answer to survey questions.
And remind us which survey it is.
Well, the most widely used is the General Social Survey, and it has asked the same question for over 50 years now. And the question, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, is everything taken together, are you happy, okay, or sad? All you have is the answers to that question, 1, 2, or 3. I've rescaled it, but basically that's the raw material that we're going to be talking about.
So it's a simple question. And how often are people asked this? Is it once a year?
Not exactly every year, but almost every year, every couple of years, from 1972 to today.
Okay.
Now, I have excluded the last few years because of the pandemic, which not only has disrupted society, it disrupted the survey business.
Right.
Because you couldn't go out and ask people. You had to change the method.
So your sample goes from 72 up to, is it 2018?
Just the last one before the pandemic, which would be 2018.
Okay. Maybe that was the last time some people were happy. Okay.
We're going to find out. There's
Right.
actually some quite distressing preliminary evidence of what the pandemic did. But for the moment, yes, we're excluding
Right.
everything from the pandemic on, and that means the last such survey was 2018. They couldn't do 2020, so pushed it off for a year. Anyway, we don't want to focus on that.
But that's a long, span of time that
It's a very long span
gives you
of
some
time.
great data about trends. So
Yes.
one of the big trends that I wanted to have you talk about is the marital premium. What's the marital premium?
Well, that's the focus of this, my latest excursion into this terrain. A marriage is the most important dividing line between happy and, I would say, okay. Marriage then followed by income, but marriage would be the most important dividing line. The overall population, the average happiness is positive in the sense that it's above okay. It's not giddy happy, but it's above okay. But if you just do a division married and unmarried, there's a huge gap. The married are considerably happier.
Okay, when you say considerably, how much happier?
Okay, so the way I do it is very simple. I take these answers and I subtract the sad from the happy. So that gives you kind of a net happiness. I treat the okay as a 0. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about happy minus sad, the extremes. Now, in 100 randomly chosen people, that's 20. 20 more happy than sad. If you make the division into married and unmarried, it's 0 for the unmarried, just as many happy as sad. If you look at the married, it's plus 30. That difference is enormous in this context.
So that's the premium.
Especially so. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's the difference between every 100 people. If they're married, what's their answer? If they're unmarried, what's their answer? It's that difference.
Right.
And it's averaged around 30 since the unmarried are 0 and the married are 30. It's averaged around 30 over 50 years.
Okay, well, I want to get to the trend, but
Yes,
you're just to be clear, you're not saying that marriage actually causes. Well, you
No,
don't know.
no. This is a statement about the odds of finding happy people in the population. And the causality lines can and probably do run in both directions.
In other words, happy people may be more likely to get married.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And we have had people in economics and other social sciences who have worried about that. And it's hard to really know. And it's a source of constant debate.
As someone who's thinking, should I not get married? They're
They're
not going to learn much from this.
But what they would learn is the odds of finding happy people go up if you look at married people as opposed
Got
to
it. So that's the marital premium. Now you referred there to this. You got this 46-year period. Is the marital premium stable?
more or less. That's really the basic finding of all of this. Is it's not only enormous in terms of magnitude, it's pretty stable. That's gone up a little bit. If you push hard, you'd say, it's a little higher now. It's 35, but it is pretty stable.
But as you say, it's gone up a little bit.
Yes.
In the past 20 years. How do you explain that?
The answer is I don't, but I have a big clue,
Okay.
which is the marriage rate has gone down. At the start of this period, in the early 1970s, 80% of adults, we're talking about people 25 and older, in that group, 80% were married in the early 70s. 80. It's 60 now. If you start chopping the population up into those groups where marriage has declined most substantially and those where it's declined less, the ones where it's declined most substantially are the ones where the marital premium has gone up. So what's happened is that the groups where the pressure is very strong not to get married leave married people who are getting more out of the relationship than the unmarried.
Is that because, could that be because social pressure, in the absence of social pressure or with less social pressure, people are marrying because they really genuinely want to?
They would be more on the margin of the happiness aspect of it. If we're back to 80%, as we were in the 1970s, everybody's getting married. You're going to have people who remember, we're talking about a 35-point premium. That means that there's a lot of people who are married and unhappy, a lot of people who are married and unhappy, and so on and so forth. So this marital premium is not for every, 30 isn't something that applies to an individual marriage. It's an average across the whole population. So let's say you have people who are on the margin, should I or shouldn't I get married? And the social pressure's not there. Well, we get married. They're just as happy as as if they had made the decision to be unmarried. Once the pressure builds up not to get married, that margin will have to shift. You got to have a good reason to get married, and extra happiness is part of that reason. Or you have to be extra happy to be out there and socially gregarious enough to find a mate in more difficult circumstances. There's other evidence that's in the paper of that kind of thing. The racial differential. The decline in marriage is across the board, but it is particularly substantial for blacks. You are now in a world where it's exceptional for black adults to be married, 2-to-1. The marital happiness premium for blacks has gone up. It used to be less than whites. It's now a little bit more than white. Again, put this in some context. We're not talking about huge differences. We're talking about small but perceptible differences.
So if the average is 35, what is the average for black people?
It would be in the high 30s as opposed to around 35. And it would have been in the high 20s. So there's been an uptick in black marital happiness. The gap in unmarried happiness is also closed. But this is an illustration of when you're in a world where 2 out of 3 adults are unmarried, you're having to find pretty good reasons to get married and stay married. We can get to how you get unmarried. There's cohabitation, there's divorce, whatever it is. These are exceptionally hardy marriages in that kind of a world. And it shows up in the marital premium. So that's one reason. But again, keep it in context. Every group of significant weight has a substantial marital premium.
If you're enjoying this podcast, there's another University of Chicago Podcast Network show that you should check out. It's called Capital Isn't. Capital Isn't uses the latest economic thinking to zero in on the ways that capitalism is, and more often isn't, working today. From the morality of a wealth tax, to how to reboot healthcare, to who really benefits from ESG, Capital Isn't clearly explains how capitalism can go wrong and what we can do about it. Listen to Capital Isn't, part of the University of Chicago Podcast Network. Sam, in the first half we talked about the marital premium. Let's try and understand what's going on with the marital. What explains it? Is it about children? Is it about sex?
I'm not going to be able to really explain what causes it, but how does it break down when you start looking at what goes on in a marriage? Well, people have sex and they have kids. So the one thing you want to look at is that a dividing line? And the big answer is no, but it's complicated. There's always complication. So let's start with, you can pick it, sex or kids. I looked at both of them fairly intensively, and we can talk about the complication in either
Sure,
dimension.
well, let's start with sex. I would imagine that most people find more interesting.
Okay, so there is no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that sex is correlated with happiness. I was going to make a causal statement, but I will not. If you, again, in the same sense as the marital premium and marital happiness, if you divide the population, and we have a subsample in this survey of people who are sexually active or not. If you divide the population by whether they are or are not, how frequently they have it. By the way, I was blown away by the enormous diversity of the population that is sexually active. There's substantial numbers who do it once a year and substantial numbers who, now remember, this is self-reported and it's subject to all sorts of biases, but there's a substantial number who say they do it every day.
Right.
So,
It feels like once a year.
yeah.
Okay. So, and is there a difference there?
But there is
who
a
are-
difference.
who are having more
There's
sex?
a very clear difference if you go from once a year to once a month to once a week to every. All those gradations are correlated with bumps upward in happiness. Very clear. However, you're talking about a difference between, let's say, once a year and once a day. You're talking about a difference of 5 points. It's measurable because this is such a what's nice about another nice aspect about this survey is not only is it asked the same question for 50 years, but you now have accumulated large samples which allow you to detect pretty small changes. They are clearly there, but they do not explain the marital premium. It's on the order of, if you take people who don't have sex at all, there's a substantial fraction of the population, largely older people, almost exclusively, in fact, older people, who are married and don't have sex. That could be for lots of reasons. Is there a marital premium in that group? Yes. Yes. But it's 20 points. It's not 30. So that's 10 points in going from unmarried, largely older people to very sexually active people who are young, let's
So
say.
what's the comparison if you have a young person who's unmarried, who's sexually active, versus a older person who's married
Same thing.
and
That's a good question.
sexually inactive?
That's a good question. The unmarried sexually active are happier than the unmarried inactive. Now that group is across the board age-wise, and there's a substantial celibate element. It's not half or anything like that, but it's substantial. If you compare very active unmarried to inactive unmarried, there's a difference. But if you compare,
Is the difference meaning that the person who's
Here's
sexually
the most-
active but unmarried is happier?
the most extreme one that I could think of. Let's take celibate married and old. Okay, it turns out age doesn't matter very much in this, but okay. Take somebody most active and young, but unmarried. 20-point difference. Favoring the celibate married. So you have to put all this in perspective. It is clear sex and happiness are correlated. Frequency is important, but it doesn't explain the marital. It explains 1/3 of it at most.
But the bottom line, line there is you're still happier being married.
You're still happier to be married.
Okay, let's quickly. I want to move on to children quickly.
Children,
the more boring
that's
part of it.
really complicated.
So very quickly, I mean, in a nutshell, if you have more children, are you happier?
It's not that clear. The fraction of people who get married and don't have children ever in their lives is very small. But it's not trivial. It's 1 in 10. I mean, 1 in 10 means we meet people like this on the street every day. They're actually happier than the married people with kids. That's a difficulty because 90% of the people who are getting married have kids at some point in their lives, and you can't say that having children makes people unhappy. But it's a big puzzle for somebody who's wants to say that having children is the source of marital happiness, that you have this non-trivial group out there who are happy, just as happy as other married people, in fact, happier. At all ages, it goes to almost zero at around 45. But the very young and the very old, for very different reasons, if you have children living in the house, you're not as happy as this group that doesn't have
Fascinating. Them. Okay, very quickly, I just wanted you to, in a sentence, talk about cohabitation, so people who are not married but living together, and also about gay marriage, because you just to give us the headline.
Gay marriage is going to be very complicated, but
if you can summarize it, that would be helpful.
I'll try.
Okay,
I'll try. You want to deal with which one do you want to deal with?
Let's deal with cohabitation first.
All right, that's very simple. Cohabitation is what you would call small but growing. Just as marriage has been declining, cohabitation has been increasing. And it's obviously no coincidence. It's a substitute. So my first instinct is, well, cohabitation should be leading, if I can find those people and look at their happiness. Why shouldn't they be as happy as married people? They're not. They're not even close. They are, I want to make this very clear, they are perceptibly happier than unmarried who are not cohabiting. But here are the numbers. 30 for the marital premium, roughly, well, let's round off and forget about trends for a minute. 30 for the marital premium, 10 for cohabitors, 0 for other unmarried. So they get 1/3 of the way toward the marital premium, but not the rest of the way.
Excellent.
And there's no trend.
No trends at all there. Okay, so what about gay marriage, very quickly?
Gay marriage is complicated because, first of all, it hasn't been legal. Secondly, if you go back to before 2015 or even before 2000, when no state had legal gay marriage. 2004 is the first state that has legal gay marriage. There was some before it was legal. This is all self-reported. And, people had commitments, ceremonies, and they regarded themselves as married. So the complication is most gays, when asked, are you married or not, would have said no before then, but some would have said yes. That complicates things. But as nearly as we can tell, the situation is this. Gay people as a whole are slightly less happy, but they're much less married.
Less happy than heterosexual?
Than heterosexuals as a whole.
Okay.
As a whole. But they're much less married.
Okay.
The people who report that they're married have a marital premium that's the same.
Yeah.
Almost the same as heterosexual people. It's not quite, but that's because the people who say they're unmarried and are gay a lot of them are living in a relationship that looks like marriage. And we know, the one thing we know from recent data is that once marriage becomes legal, there's a real increase in married gays. And it's coming from these people who are all but married. They're not. And
I'm going to try and wrap up all your knowledge in one sentence, which is the happiest people are black, married, and having sex regularly, and have no children, and don't have children.
I wouldn't say.
Is that right?
I wouldn't say the
on average.
I wouldn't say the marital premium.
The marital premium. Yeah. Okay. All right, but those who are enjoying the biggest marital premium are black, married, obviously, have no children, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. Yes.
Okay, well there you go.
Yes, and have a lot
so if those
of
are our
sex.
leads, and have a lot of sex. So if any of our listeners hit those categories, good for you. Okay, Sam Peltzman, so fun to have you talking about your research here on the Chicago Booth Review podcast. Thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome.
That's it for this episode of the Chicago Booth Review podcast, part of the University of Chicago Podcast Network. For more research, analysis, and insights, visit our website at chicagobooth.edu/review. When you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter so you never miss the latest in business-focused academic research. This episode was produced by Josh Stunkel. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and please do leave us a 5-star review. Until next time, I'm Hal Weitzman. Thanks for listening.